Hello. So, wherever you are watching this, it's great to just be sharing some of this with you. We are starting our new weekly thoughts from the Bible, and today we're starting to go through the book of Ruth together over the next 6 weeks. I think it's 6 weeks, we're going to journey through the book of Ruth together. And I've called it Ruth, a story of deep love, because that's what the story of Ruth is. It is such an incredible story of deep, life changing love. Often books of the Bible deal with nations and kings and power, but here in the book of Ruth, we take a narrower look at someone's life, a narrower look that finds a family amidst some of the toughest of times. But in this look of this family's life, we see depths of love shining through amidst the storms of life. We see grace, we see kindness, we see mercy, and we do see life-changing love even in the midst of grief, pain, and struggle. So today we're going to go through Ruth chapter 1. So if you haven't read Ruth chapter 1 yet, why don't you hit pause, go and read all of Ruth chapter 1, and then come back and when you hear some of the context or some of the stuff that was really stirred in me about Ruth chapter 1. So we pick up the story, Ruth, straight away in the midst of crisis. The land is in famine, and so a family moves to Moab with the hope of better fortunes. There's a husband, Elimelech, a wife, Naomi, and their two sons, and they travel to Moab to get away from the famine. And in Moab, Elimelech dies. This meant that as a widow, Naomi would be looked after by her sons in the culture of this time. Her sons married women from Moab, Oprah and Ruth, and they lived in Moab like this, the sons and their families caring for Naomi in Moab for 10 years. But after 10 years, both Naomi's sons died, leaving 3 women alone in Moab: Naomi, Ruth, and Oprah. In this culture, women were cared for by the males in their family, the male seen as the provider, the key almost to society, to the world around them. Widows almost had the same social status as orphans in this society, outcasts, for no other reason than they had no male to care for them. Time and time again, the love of God is explained to people in the Bible by the fact that we're all called to care for and to look after who? Widows and orphans. We see this, for example, in Exodus 22, but we also see it in the New Testament in James 1. There is a biblical call to care for the widow and the orphan. Why? Because they're seen as outcasts in society in this time. And that at this time, no one had a responsibility to care for orphans or widows. God loves all people. Jesus came for the last, the least, and the lost. Some of the most marginalized people in this society that we're reading about were widows and orphans. That is why the Bible keeps calling us to care for them, because as God's children, we need to show the last, the least, and the lost that they are not forgotten and they have a place in God's family. Naomi, Ruth, and Oprah now fell into this category, facing an uncertain future in this society. So, with nothing now keeping Naomi to stay in Moab anymore, and the situation of the famine was lifted in Bethlehem, Naomi decides to return home to her own people, probably with the hope of finding some level of care and support there. Having no husbands anymore, Ruth and Oprah start to go with Naomi. They felt a loyalty and a love to stay with Naomi. They were family. They cared for her. They had done for the last 10 years. And now they knew that they had no one and that she had no one. They were a family and they wanted to continue to love and care for her. What incredible sign of love, devotion, care, kindness, and loyalty. But if they went with Naomi, they were shortchanging their own futures to simply love and care for her. In this culture, if your husband died, the law said you'd have to marry his brother. This was a way of making sure that there weren't widows and that people were cared for. And they would have known this. The only way that Ruth and Oprah would have had a future husband if they stayed with Naomi would have been for Naomi to find someone, Naomi to remarry, Naomi to have children. And when those children were old enough to marry, they would then marry Oprah and Ruth. That was the only way that they would have a husband again if they stayed with Naomi in this situation. This is not a practical option. Verse 12 acknowledges that whilst the law is there to help people in this situation, it only helps people who has a wide family with brothers. If there's no brothers to fill the gap, then there's very little hope for the widow. However, Ruth and Oprah still have options. They still have family in Moab. They can return home to their mother and their family, be cared for by them until they have new husbands. There is a hope for them to not be social outcasts that their situation at the moment has left them. So what does Naomi try to do? She tries to send both Ruth and Oprah home to give them a future, to give them a hope. What an amazing act of kindness. These women loved Naomi so much that they were prepared to go with her to the detriment of their own lives, but at least the three of them would have been together. However, Naomi releases them out of love and kindness to great detriment to herself. She selflessly releases them from their bonds to her. Why? So they can have a new life. What an incredible act of selfless love. What an incredible act of sacrificial, deep love for these two women. An incredible act of kindness that would give them a future and a hope, even if it would remove some of that for Naomi. In a teary moment, Oprah leaves, but Ruth just can't leave Naomi. The deep love she feels for Naomi runs so much deeper than the love she has for herself in Ruth. She will not abandon Naomi to face this future alone, regardless of the cost to self. I love verses 16 to 18, such incredible words of selfless love and devotion that Ruth declares for Naomi. And so Naomi gives in. And her and Ruth go off to Bethlehem together. Two widows with an uncertain future, but a deep, deep love for each other. This mirrors a little bit of some of the selfless love Christ shows for each of us. The deep, deep love of God for all of us. A deep, deep love that will not abandon us to be alone. A deep love that dies on the cross sacrificially so that we can have a future and a hope so that we don't have to be alone. This family moment here in Ruth chapter 1 mirrors some of the love that Christ and God has for us. Do we realize just how deep the Father's love is for us?